We're going to talk about profiting from panic today, and I've got a lot to go through. Generally, it looks like this. We're going to talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has been on a tear against Bill Gates lately. It's been inspiring and fascinating, and I'm going to read what he posted on his Instagram account later in the video. We're also going to look at Dr. Scott Jensen, who happens to be a senator from Minnesota, and he's talking about the reporting requirements that he got handed not too long ago, among other things. And that relates to the statistics that they're gathering for this COVID-19 or the coronavirus deaths. I want to show you how the reporting around ordinary flu has been falsified for years and purposely weaponized to create a huge predatory industry that makes its money and usurps control through bad data and false panic. It seems to have begun in the early 2000s, just after Bill Gates was brought into what they call global health. Then there was an explosion of investment in this area by so-called philanthropists and non-governmental organizations, humanitarian organizations, and so-called charities. According to reports in 2004, the Centers for Disease Control became the de facto vaccine marketing board. I will show you that in this video. And it purposefully came up with a plan to induce demand for vaccines. So in the video, we're going to have clips from Bill Gates, clips from Deborah Birx, clips from a lot of people. And there's also going to be a significant amount of reading in this one. Mr. Bajoman, at Bajoman73 on Twitter, sent me this article from the Huffington Post, which was from 2014. Don't believe everything you read about flu deaths. The article basically argues that the flu death, the normal flu death numbers going way back in time, started to be inflated, like greatly inflated, because the news was relying on statistics that were generated by some sketchy death certificate entries, which then contributed to bad computer modeling, which then led to horribly inflated flu death statistics. He then goes on to describe why that number doesn't reflect medical reality, showing that the 1-2 punch of faulty computer modeling, along with a 7-step recipe for generating demand for vaccines, has changed the world's approach to vaccination. That's right, it's purposeful. And I'll show that as we go along. The CDC's decision to play up flu deaths dates back a decade when it realized the public wasn't following its advice on the flu vaccine. During the 2003 flu season, the manufacturers were telling us that they weren't receiving a lot of orders for vaccines, says Dr. Glenn Novak, Associate Director for Communications at CDC's National Immunization Program. At the time this author wrote this article, NBC was reporting that the flu deaths from just regular influenza were 36,000 a year in the United States. But that number has been called controversial because they're based on estimates. The author says, controversial is an understatement. The numbers differ wildly from the sober tallies recorded on death certificates. According to the National Vital Statistics System in the U.S., for example, annual flu deaths in 2010 amounted to just 500 per year. Even that 500 figure for the U.S. could be too high, according to analysis in authoritative journals such as the American Journal of Public Health and the British Medical Journal. Only about 15 to 20% of people who come down with flu-like symptoms have the influenza virus. The other 80 to 85% actually caught rhinovirus or other germs that are indistinguishable from the true flu without laboratory tests, which are rarely done. In 2001, a year in which death certificates listed 257 Americans as having died of flu, only 18 were positively identified as true flus. U.S. data on influenza deaths are a mess, states a 2005 article in the British Medical Journal entitled, Are U.S. flu deaths figures more PR than science? This article takes issue with the 36,000 flu death figure commonly claimed. Because death certificates belie claims of numerous flu deaths, CDC enlisted computer models to arrive at its 36,000 flu death estimate. But even here, it needed to bend conventional medical terminology to arrive at compelling death numbers. Because the flu was rarely an underlying cause of death, the CDC created the sound-alike term, influenza-associated death. Just wow. So the CDC was not getting enough death certificates that said flu was the cause of death. So they made up a term, influenza-associated death, which then would be put on the death certificates or added to as in addition to the other cause of death, which allowed them to go out to the public and say there were all these deaths from influenza-related death. You see what they're doing. Using this new loose definition, CDC's computer models could tally people who died of a heart ailment or other causes after having the flu. And this is precisely what the coronavirus task force people are doing. They're using that methodology to fudge the numbers here. If you don't believe me, listen to Deborah Birx herself.
One for Dr. Fauci or Dr. Birx. Can you talk about your concerns about deaths being misreported by coronavirus because of either lack of testing or standards for how they're characterized?
So I think in this country, we've taken a very liberal approach to mortality. And I think the reporting here has been pretty straightforward over the last 5 to 6 weeks. Prior to that, when there wasn't testing in January and February, that's a very different situation and unknown. There are other countries that if you had a pre-existing condition, and let's say the virus caused you to go to the ICU and then have a heart or kidney problem, some countries are recording that as a heart issue or a kidney issue and not a COVID-19 death. Right now, we're still recording it, and the great thing about having forms that come in and a form that has the ability to mark it as COVID-19 infection, the intent is right now that if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death.
Can you be sure? I mean, you hear from coroners that that's not necessarily the case. Or are you sure? How can you be confident about that? And is there any concern that it skews the...
She just admitted it to you, to your face, in front of the nation, in front of the world. Deborah Birx just admitted that they are using those tricky methods to scoop things in under the coronavirus COVID-19 death category. There are people speaking out about this. This Minnesota senator and doctor, Dr. Scott Jensen. He said he received a 7-page document from the health department to fill out death certificates with a diagnosis of COVID-19, whether the person actually died from COVID-19 or not. So there you have it from a frontline physician and a senator, that is what they are being instructed to do. And I do have that document. That document is easily available online where you can see for yourself that they are being instructed to do just what the CDC was doing back in the day with the regular flu in order to sell flu vaccines. It's all right out there. Anthony Fauci didn't like this very much. He doesn't like anybody speculating on whether the tests work, whether the statistics are good, whether the models are flawed. He doesn't like it. And here's what he had to say about all of it.
What do you say to those folks who are making the claim without really any evidence that these deaths are being padded, that the number of COVID-19 deaths are being padded?
You will always have conspiracy theories when you have very challenging public health crises. They are nothing but distractions.
Conspiracy theory. As we've discussed before, this is all they have. They flood the zone. Remember from Event 201, coronavirus pandemic planning exercise that was held in October 2019? Their whole strategy was to flood the zone with trusted voices so that only their information would come out. And when these people are faced with reliable witnesses like Dr. Scott Jensen, for example, they don't rebut the facts. They just name call. And their favorite name, of course, is conspiracy theorist. But I think the public is waking up. I really do. And I don't think that this is going to hold water. All right. Dr. Fauci there called everyone that's asking questions or going against his narrative a conspiracy theorist. And we're going to get Scott Jensen's reaction to that a little later in this video. To return to the ending of this Huffington Post article. This is where we meet Glenn Novak and we learn of the CDC's response to the manufacturers telling them that not enough people were ordering flu vaccines. Glenn Novak came up with this 7-step recipe for generating interest in and demand for flu or any other vaccination. And he had a slideshow that was presented at the 2004 National Influenza Vaccine Summit. The CDC unabashedly decided to create a mass market for the flu vaccine by enlisting the media into panicking the public. An obedient and unquestioning media obliged by hyping the numbers, and 10 years later it is obliging still. Who is Novak? Anyway, what's his specialty? He works at the CDC. Here's his profile from the CDC. It says, prior to joining CDC in January 1999, Dr. Novak was an associate professor of advertising and communication at the University of Georgia. He has authored or co-authored a number of peer-reviewed journal articles on communications practices, social marketing, and health communications. So he runs around calling himself Dr. Novak, but he only has a PhD in communications. This is like how everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people, even in the alt media, are still calling Tedros Adhanom Dr. Tedros. He's not a doctor. Maybe he has a PhD. I don't know. I bet you if he got it, it was one of these honorary degrees or something. I don't know. Let's have a quick look at that 7-step recipe for generating interest in and demand for flu vaccines. In this Consumer Policy Institute article called Vaccine Fevers, also from 2004, they say they got a hold of the PowerPoint slide presentation. So they say, in the truncated language that appears on his slides, quote, medical experts and public health authorities should publicly, for example, via media, state concern and alarm and predict dire outcomes and urge influenza vaccination. This recipe, the slideshow indicated, would result in, quote, a significant media interest and attention, and B, framing of the flu season in terms that motivate behavior, such as very severe, more severe than last or past years, or deadly. Other aspects of the CDC's 7-step recipe for generating interest in and demand for flu or any other vaccination includes, quote, continued reports, for example, from health officials and media, that influenza is causing severe illness and or affecting lots of people, helping foster the perception that many people are susceptible to a bad case of influenza, and, quote, visible, tangible examples of the seriousness of the illness, for example, pictures of children, families of those affected coming forward, and people getting vaccinated. Well, in my video a couple videos ago, we went over Dr. Colleen Smith at that Elmhurst Hospital where they characterized, she shot undercover footage supposedly in there and said it was apocalyptic. This is where we get the image of the morgue trucks. This is the seed moment of the hysteria over the lack of ventilators. That's all Dr. Colleen Smith. And if you watched my video, you know there's a lot of questions surrounding whether or not that was authentic. Was it just following the advice of how to create interest in and demand for flu vaccinations? The evidence keeps mounting up that this is a plan, a long-term, decades-long strategy by these public health type of people. I was listening to a Facebook post by a doctor someone sent me, and I couldn't find it again. But he came up with the perfect analogy for why this is such horrifying criminal behavior. He likened this panic generation by health professionals and the media to this situation: calling fire in a crowded movie theater. It starts a stampede. It kills people. Generating panic falsely is a crime. That is one of the limits on free speech, isn't it? I thought it was a great analogy, so I thought I'd share it with you. Remember Laura Burks? She works for Bill and Melinda Gates now, but she used to work for USAID. And when she was at USAID, she gave a talk where she said that the private sector can only join in global health if they are guaranteed a market. And what's the market for health providers? Sick people. That's their market. And so you wonder how far they will go in generating this phony panic, or even generating the illnesses, perhaps. And we're getting close to talking about that now. I just want to point out that this Glenn Novak, who wrote that seven-step thing to generating vaccine interest, he now works for an institution called the Task Force for Global Health that is funded by Bill Gates, of course. The project Novak is involved in deals with the transition from OPV, oral polio vaccine, to IPV, injectable polio vaccine, and involves assisting a number of project partners. Major partners in the project are the World Health Organization, UNICEF, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the CDC, Rotary International, PATH International, the Gavi Alliance, and the Task Force for Global Health. So this is another Gates job. And then if we go look at the Task Force for Global Health's page online, they say that they're based in Atlanta, Georgia, with a field office in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Well, where did Tedros Adhanom come from before he was the World Health Organization head? They plucked him out of Ethiopia. And if you've seen earlier videos of mine, or if you've seen other people cover the history of Tedros Adhanom, he was a communist, Marxist, terrorist. He belonged to an organization that was a listed terror organization in Ethiopia. Then they formed the government after staging a coup. And then they, under Tedros's leadership, began to persecute the ethnic majority in the country. They withheld healthcare from the children, withheld nutrition from them. You've heard of the Ethiopian starvation problem. Tedros was there for all of that and much more, so much more. So isn't it interesting that the Task Force for Global Health was in Addis Ababa? And on the Task Force for Global Health's page, it says, who is our co-founder, William H. Faggy? William H. Faggy is the inspiration behind the work we do, an epidemiologist by training. He was one of the architects of the successful smallpox eradication effort in the 1970s, which is still the only disease to be eradicated in humanity. In 2012, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Barack Obama. That all sounds very good, and I don't have any reason, I didn't look into this man's background, to doubt the sincerity of Dr. Faggy. Perhaps he was a wonderful, well-intentioned man, and maybe it was just a mistake on his part when he approached Bill Gates to get Bill Gates to join them in the global health effort, because it turns out that's what happened. From Bill Gates' own YouTube channel, Heroes in the Field, Dr. Bill Faggy, we learned that Bill Faggy was the director of the CDC, and then he eradicated smallpox. He was interested in doing the same sort of thing for polio, and he approached Bill Gates to form a partnership in the year 2000. Bill says in the video that he knew nothing about any of this until Faggy approached him and gave him some books to read. So it's a question mark. I don't know where it all went wrong, but I think it all went wrong. Bill Gates now believes himself to be king of the world, and he's going on television show after television show with that grin of his, excited. I mean, he's always been a bit weird about it. Here's a little excerpt from the Bill Faggy interview first.
Yeah, thank God for smallpox and its success. I'm pretty sure we wouldn't have undertaken polio without that example.
Yeah.
It's really great that that happened with smallpox, because now we can do polio. That was then. That was years ago. But listen to Bill now about the coronavirus.
It is fair to say things won't go back to truly normal until we have a vaccine that we've gotten out to basically the entire world. And so, the best people at the foundation who are all about high volume vaccines, are working with many manufacturers, not only on the safety and efficacy, but getting that billions of dose capacity.
Yep, he wants to vaccinate basically everybody in the world. I found this article in a medical journal from 2019. I found it because Glenn Novak's name appears as one of the authors. In May 2012, the Global Vaccine Action Plan was endorsed by 194 member states at the 65th World Health Assembly. It was a product of the Decade of Vaccines collaboration, an unprecedented effort led by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Health Organization, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and the United Nations Children's Fund, and the U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, to extend the full benefits of vaccines to all people by 2020 and beyond. All of this stuff is Gates, with the possible exception of UNICEF. But this one, the United States National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, you know who that is? Anthony Fauci. So you can see it was laid out right there in July 2019 that Glenn Novak guy, Anthony Fauci, and 3 different organizations that belong basically to Bill and Melinda Gates, they wanted to extend the full benefits of vaccines to all people by 2020. What year is it? 2020. Are these the usual characters? Yes, they are. I have a lot of disdain for Bill Gates, but I don't think it comes anywhere close to the level of disdain that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has for Bill Gates. And I know this because he's recently been posting quite a bit about it on Instagram. I don't have an Instagram account, so I couldn't get it from there, but here is the full text from a site called, I forget the name, but I'll link to it in the description box. From Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Instagram post today, April 9th, 2020. Vaccines for Bill Gates are a strategic philanthropy that feed his many vaccine-related businesses, including Microsoft's ambition to control a global vaccine ID enterprise, and give him dictatorial control over global health policy, the spear tip of corporate neo-imperialism. Gates's obsession with vaccines seems fueled by a messianic conviction that he is ordained to save the world with technology and a godlike willingness to experiment with the lives of lesser humans. Promising to eradicate polio with $1.2 billion, Gates took control of India's National Advisory Board and mandated 50 polio vaccines, up from 5, to every child before the age of 5. Indian doctors blame the Gates campaign for a devastating vaccine strain polio epidemic that paralyzed 496,000 children between 2000 and 2017. In 2017, the Indian government dialed back Gates's vaccine regimen and evicted Gates and his cronies from the NAB. Polio paralysis rates dropped precipitously. In 2017, the World Health Organization reluctantly admitted that the global polio explosion is predominantly vaccine strain, meaning it is coming from Gates's vaccine program. The most frightening epidemics in Congo, the Philippines, and Afghanistan are all linked to Gates's vaccine. By 2018, 3/4 of global polio cases were from Gates's vaccines. In 2014, the Gates Foundation funded tests of experimental HPV vaccines developed by GSK and Merck on 23,000 young girls in remote Indian provinces. Approximately 1,200 suffered severe side effects, including autoimmune and fertility disorders. 7 died. Indian government investigations charged that Gates Gates-funded researchers committed pervasive ethical violations, pressuring vulnerable village girls into the trial, bullying parents, forging consent forms, and refusing medical care to the injured girls. The case is now in the country's Supreme Court. In 2010, the Gates Foundation funded a trial of GSK's experimental malaria vaccine, killing 151 African infants and causing serious adverse effects including paralysis, seizure, and febrile convulsions to 1,048 of the 5,049 children. During Gates's 2002 MENAFRIVAC campaign in sub-Saharan Africa, Gates operatives forcibly vaccinated thousands of African children against meningitis. Between 50 and 500 children developed paralysis. South African newspapers complained, quote, "We are guinea pigs for drug makers," end quote. Nelson Mandela's former senior economist, Professor Patrick Bond, describes Gates's philanthropic practices as, quote, "ruthless and immoral," end quote. In 2010, Gates committed $10 billion to the World Health Organization, promising to reduce population in part through new vaccines. A month later, Gates told a TED Talk that new vaccines, quote, could reduce population. In 2014, Kenya's Catholic Doctors Association accused the World Health Organization of chemically sterilizing millions of unwilling Kenyan women with a phony tetanus vaccine campaign. Independent labs found the sterility formula in every vaccine tested. After denying the charges, the WHO finally admitted it had been developing the sterility vaccines for over a decade. Similar accusations came from Tanzania, Nicaragua, Mexico, and the Philippines. A 2017 study, Morganson et al., 2017, showed that World Health Organization's popular DTP is killing more Africans than the disease it pretends to prevent. Vaccinated girls suffered 10 times the death rate of unvaccinated children. Gates and the World Health Organization refused to recall the lethal vaccine which World Health Organization forces upon millions of African children annually. Global public health advocates around the world accuse Gates of hijacking WHO's agenda away from the projects that are proven to curb infectious diseases, such as clean water, hygiene, nutrition, and economic development. They say he has diverted agency resources to serve his personal fetish that good health only comes in a syringe. In addition to using his philanthropy to control the World Health Organization, UNICEF, Gavi, and PATH, Gates funds private pharmaceutical companies that manufacture vaccines and a massive network of pharmaceutical industry front groups that broadcast deceptive propaganda, develop fraudulent studies, conduct surveillance and psychological operations against vaccine hesitancy, and use Gates's power and money to silence dissent and coerce compliance. In his recent non-stop farm media appearances, Gates appears gleeful that the COVID-19 crisis will give him the opportunity to force his third world vaccine programs on American children. Boom. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. just laid the smack down. And I hope that alternative media and citizen journalists will jump all over that to provide the real evidence to back up Robert Kennedy Jr.'s claims. I have high confidence that they are true because this is Robert Kennedy Jr.'s passion. He has been doing this a long time. And if you recall, he had been tapped by Donald Trump to lead a giant inquiry into vaccine programs. He obviously has done his homework. It was Bill Gates, according to Bill Gates, who stopped that commission from being struck.
Then the second time I saw him was the March after that, so March 2017 in the White House. In both of those two meetings, he asked me if vaccines weren't a bad thing. because he was considering a commission to look into ill effects of vaccines, and somebody, his name is Robert Kennedy Jr., was advising him that vaccines were causing bad things. And I said, no, that's a dead end. That would be a bad thing. Don't do that.
You notice too how disdainfully he mentions Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s name. Like, who is that again? His name's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. That's John F. Kennedy's nephew. He's directly related to, some would say, the greatest U.S. president of all time. And Bill Gates scoffs at that because he's just a flea to him, someone with his money and power and control. Bill Gates is an insane man, in my opinion. But he's got so much money and power, and he's so well dug in. So many people's livelihoods depend on Bill Gates' scam and con and grift. Remember, Bill Gates got brought into this whole thing by this Dr. Fauci from the CDC, who had supposedly, or I guess he has, eradicated smallpox. Was this a gigantic miscalculation on Dr. Fauci's part? Because Bill Gates never would have gotten involved in it, wouldn't have started the polio stuff if it wasn't for him. Anthony Fauci has gone out there today and he said that the government, the federal government of the United States, is considering issuing Americans certificates of immunity from the coronavirus. What? No, I think he's mistaking his master. There, listen.
Eventually, what we'll have to have is certificates of who's a recovered person, who's a vaccinated person, because you don't want people moving around the world where you'll have some countries that won't have it under control. Sadly, you don't want to completely block off the ability for those, people to go there and come back and move around. So eventually there will be sort of this digital immunity proof that will help facilitate the global reopening up.
Yeah, it was Bill Gates that made that suggestion. And as the Next News Network points out in their video coverage of this, the uploaders at the TED site, the TED Talk site, actually deleted lines. They deleted those lines because they know how bad it makes Bill Gates look. But he's the best they've got. I'm Bill Gates. I'm not a doctor. I was a tech nerd until I decided there were too many people on the earth. I'm Tedros Adhanom. I'm not a doctor. I was a Marxist terrorist until I took over the World Health Organization. How did we get here? Well, as we saw, even from the Huffington Post article that I began with, the stats, the statistics about deaths were sane in 2004, up until 2004. And that's when the CDC started to get in bed with the vaccine makers and the drug companies in general. They weren't getting enough takers. So the CDC started to be the marketing arm, the panic creation arm, and in slid, Bill Gates into that milieu with his crazy messiah complex, as Robert Kennedy stated. And then everybody started getting in on the action. The World Bank issued pandemic bonds, and these bonds wouldn't pay out if there was a coronavirus pandemic by a certain date. You can pause this and read it. But now even the CEOs of the Federal Reserve banks are getting in on the action. Listen to this guy, James Bullard, I think his name is, going right along with the certificate plan.
On the other side of this pandemic, are those jobs actually going to exist for people to go back to?
I have good news for you, Margaret, because there is a solution using available technology today to fix the economic part of this problem. The solution is universal testing. What you want is every single person to get tested every day, and then they would wear a badge like they would after they voted or something like that to show that they've been tested. This would immediately sort out who's been infected and who hasn't been infected. That would help the healthcare sector. but it would also help the economy because we could interact with each other with a lot of confidence.
Can you imagine? These people have nothing to do with health. None of them are doctors. None of them have been medically trained, but they just think this is a good idea because somehow in the background, they've probably got one of these type scams running. Who knows? Who knows what'll come out in the fullness of time? And what on Ingram angle, after Dr. Fauci said that anyone questioning the numbers, questioning the testing, questioning the death rates, questioning all of it, was a conspiracy theorist? Well, Dr. Scott Jensen had something to say about that.
Conspiracy theories, doctor? So you're engaging in conspiracy theories. What do you say to Dr. Fauci tonight?
Well, I would remind him that anytime healthcare intersects with dollars, it gets awkward. Right now, Medicare has determined that if you have a COVID-19 admission to the hospital, you'll get paid $13,000. If that COVID-19 patient goes on a ventilator, you get $39,000, 3 times as much.
You reject what he said?
Absolutely.
Puts a whole new spin on it, doesn't it? All that money if you get a positive test for coronavirus? All tons more money if you end up needing a ventilator? Maybe we're starting to understand why there's such hysteria over the ventilator thing. If so, then I hope you appreciate how absolutely just depraved these people are that would pull this on us. And I hope you can see the similarities between calling fire in a crowded movie theater and calling pandemic against the world, against the whole world. This is having terrible consequences out here on the street, isn't it? Businesses are going under. People are getting hostile towards each other. And I mean, just take a look at this. What's going on here? Why, they're dragging him by force off the bus because he chose not to wear a mask.
Take me if you fucking want. What the fuck? Close this door, man. Fucking pussy ass. I want all y'all fucking badge numbers too. Make it picture. Yeah.
People, bus drivers and grocery store clerks who have been brought in as the brown shirts, as the enforcers of this, are just being vicious towards their fellow humans. Some people have completely forgotten what it's like to be free. And is it all because of panic? Is it because of this upside down morality? Is it because we can tell somehow when we listen to people like Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci give us their snake oil sales pitch that the baddies are in control? And so people who are naturally weak, people who naturally gravitate to hiding behind bullies, they're just lining up to be the enforcers because they have this primal instinct that it's going to be you or me. So they want to survive it. I don't know, but it's having far-reaching effects. So today we looked at the heroes and zeros. I gave you a few more people. Glenn Novak, Jay Bullard from the St. Louis Fed, and I don't know what to make of Dr. Fauci. But all these people are either causing panic by yelling fire in a crowded theater when there is no fire, or they are profiting from it. They're happy to have their little jobs on the backs of this ruse. And of course, Bill Gates, in his utter glee to be on all the television shows bragging about his dominance on the vaccine industry. But we are hearing the truth from Robert Kennedy Jr. in his long post about the crimes against humanity, the vast, vast crimes against humanity committed by Bill Gates. We're hearing it from him. But he's a conspiracy theorist, and the mainstream media are lockstep covering up for Bill Gates. Oh yeah, listen to the irony of this video clip where Bill Gates is talking to his mentor, Dr. Fauci, about why global health is just going to grow and get bigger and bigger.
I remember telling students that no one is going to donate money for global health. And so don't expect rich people to get interested. You didn't have routes to get into global health. Anyone that wanted to get in had to discover their own way. And suddenly that all changed, and even global health research changed, where people could not have seen getting money for global health research. It turned out to be the most popular subject in school after school.
But that should continue. We've got science on our side, we've got morality on our side, and all those people who got involved these last 15 or 20 years, hopefully they'll be inspiring and teaching the next generation like you did us.
He says he has morality on his side, but notice he can't help but laugh.
Continue. We've got science on our side, we've got morality on our side.
He can't help but laugh because it is a joke that he would say such a thing. Okay, everybody, I am going to stop talking now. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave me a thumbs up. Leave me a comment. Hit the subscribe button if you are not already a subscriber. And also check the description box because I've got lots of references for you there. If you'd like to support my work, you may send me something through the snail mail. My P.O. box is available on my website, amazingpolly.net. Check the contact page there, the tab across the top. Or I still have my paypal.me address, amazingpolly. No, that's not it. I'm tired. The paypal.me address is paypal.me/Polly St. George. A link will be in the description box for you. All right, everybody. Until next time, peace out.